This is a freshwater aquarium. This one's a brackish water aquarium. And finally, a saltwater aquarium. Now obviously the differences I'm going to point out is going to have to do with the salinity of the water itself. And to put that into perspective, we typically measure the salinity of an aquarium based on specific gravity. Now I sink like a rock in water. However, some people know how to float, and it's easier to float in salt water than it is in fresh water. And that has everything to do with the surface tension of each water and how it's composed. More on that in a minute. Now in a freshwater aquarium like this one, if we were to measure the specific gravity, it's going to come back as 0. Whereas in a saltwater aquarium, depending on if it's fish only like this one, we could have a salinity of 1.022 to something like 1.025 that you'd find more commonly in a full-blown reef. The brackish water aquarium is going to be somewhere in the middle, and it's going to vary greatly depending on the species of fish that you're keeping. However, for example, in this aquarium, the salinity or the specific gravity that I'm measuring is currently at 1.008. Now the way I run my fresh water compared to brackish water, compared to salt water, the biggest difference is of course in the salinity. Let's start off by lighting. You guys will remember I built these pendant style lights lit up by these basic LED light bulbs. This one, for example, is 11 watts, but for the most part, I'm running 7 watts of LED power on each of these lights. I was just trying these bigger ones, which didn't really make a difference. That is not only the case with the fresh water, but the brackish water as well, another fresh water, and then of course, the saltwater aquarium as well. You'll also remember that the filtration is built into the aquariums. It goes through some sponges, some ceramic biological media, and then of course returned with the return pump to the main aquarium. That is the case with all of them. The only thing that's changing is the shape of the biological media. Basically using what I have on hand, whether it's smaller of your tiny cylinders or the balls that I've had for quite some time. You'll also remember I built these 4-foot long overhead sumps. Again, goes through some sponge, some ceramic media, returned to the aquarium. This one, in fact, is running a freshwater aquarium housing Lake Malawi cichlids, the Auratus. Here's another example of a 4-foot long filter using the exact same media, just different shapes. Sponge, ceramic media, returned to the aquarium. The only difference is this is on the saltwater tank. So I got the idea of, since I do run all of my aquariums essentially the same, using the same basic principles of fish keeping, why can't I convert saltwater aquarium to look like a freshwater tank? And we're going to get to that in a moment. Now, of course, on a fish only system, this layout works absolutely fantastically. You can technically leave it at that, run it like a freshwater system, do your top ups, which when water evaporates, it technically leaves salt behind, so you just want to add in fresh water, you don't want to add in salt water, or the tank's just going to get like saltier and saltier. When you do a water change though, you do have to do it with pre-mixed, chill out Kevin, pre-mixed salt water and fill it back up. Pretty basic, but if you want to prolong those water changes, because salt is pretty expensive, we want to look at nutrient export to some extent. Now the water level on this aquarium is relatively low simply because I added a, kind of like a hang on the back protein skimmer. And if I had it up all the way, I wouldn't be able to have the lid on properly. I guess I could cut it out and have a tank filled up. I just kind of put this tank together quite simply. But the way a protein skimmer works, let me explain this. All a protein skimmer is basically a mechanism that creates micro bubbles. Now technically I filmed this 7 years ago. Yes, I talked about this before. This is an image of an air bubbler in fresh water. Notice how familiar it looks for you freshwater keepers. Nice, healthy, big bubbles just bursting at the surface, causing all kinds of surface agitation, circulating the aquarium, and simply just adding that air bubbler look that some of you guys really like. Personally, I prefer it because it's a cheap way for circulation as well as surface agitation. Now let's put that bubbler in a saltwater tank using the same stone and the same air pressure, and notice the difference in the bubbles, their size. In a saltwater aquarium, we can create bubbles that are 4 to 5 times smaller than in freshwater, and that's simply due to surface tension. Basically, there's greater surface tension in a saltwater aquarium. And when it comes to creating those tiny micro bubbles, that's absolutely perfect, because what's happening there? Oh, do you ever look at the top of your freshwater aquarium, you don't have much movement, and you look up and you're like, what's that oily shiny slick up there. That's a protein slick, and in saltwater we can remove that. All that is fish waste, protein molecules that essentially is the reason why we do water changes for the most part. But in a saltwater aquarium, we can create such tiny little micro bubbles that these proteins can attach to those air bubbles at a molecular level. They rise to the top, and when those bubbles burst, instead of bursting at the top of your aquarium and just spreading everywhere, they burst into a collection cup. Then we can remove that disgusting, and I'm telling you, it's pretty disgusting. Ugh, it stinks too. Now we can't really have a protein skimmer in fresh water. Now, they do make them, but they're like 10 feet tall. They're not very practical, to say the least, or even close to being efficient enough for the home aquarist, or even an aquarist like me. There's no way I would put one on a freshwater aquarium. I'm not a zoo that has millions of gallons to manage, but they do make them. They're just not that practical in the freshwater hobby. However, when it comes to salt, because of the surface tension in salt water, it's like a secret weapon. That is the only difference between my saltwater aquariums and freshwater aquariums. Lighting is the same. If you want to have different lighting, go for it. You don't want to do the backgrounds, you want to make it look like a saltwater tank, go for it. I was just trying to prove a point here. Filtration's the same, lights the same, tanks the same, water source is the same. The only difference is I've added a protein skimmer to make my water changes less needed. But there is one more thing. Notice how much biological media is in this 4-foot long overhead aquarium sump. I'm only running about 300 gallons per hour through this, which is not a lot. That's only filtering this tank 3 times an hour. However, it turns out it's the perfect amount, simply because this small amount of water has to travel through all of this biological media, and it has to do so incredibly slowly. Now, you guys have heard of aerobic bacteria and anaerobic bacteria. Now, aerobic bacteria thrives in oxygen-rich environments, which is typically going to be the species of bacteria you'll find in your filters, but there also is anaerobic bacteria, which are far more difficult to cultivate, but are arguably incredibly, almost more beneficial because they can actually consume nitrates, the reason why we do water changes. Well, at least one of them. The way that works is simple. Inside of those blocks, there's a massive amount of surface area, and deep down into it, there's very little flow and very little oxygen, the ideal environment for anaerobic bacteria. So I rarely have to do a water change on this aquarium. Not only does the protein skimmer remove a lot of the proteins in the tank and do a lot of the work for me, but because the filtration is set up the way it is, it's consuming, and it's not only facilitating the nitrogen cycle, but it's also helping me with the end process of the nitrogen cycle, which is essentially nitrate. Allowing me to do like a, I don't know, 30% water change on this, maybe once every 3 months. For the most part, I just have to top it up. Top it up with fresh water once a week or so. It's literally the lowest maintenance aquarium that I have, and by far the cheapest. Now, of course, this type of setup works for a fish-only system, but if you want to start getting into corals, well, of course, need to have the proper lighting spectrum and possibly look into other equipment. But for a fish-only system, the lighting just comes down to whatever you think looks good. So if you ever thought of going from freshwater to saltwater and going to a fish-only system and starting off like that, go for it. There's also tons of coral out there that would love a filthy environment like I typically have in my aquariums. For example, the beginnings of this tank. So you guys will remember the anemone aquarium. I started off with like 3 or 4 or maybe upwards of 10 on a big rock. Within 3 months, or definitely under a year, I had over 30 anemones. And I had to move some tanks around. We were redesigning the gallery, and I had to put Kevin and everybody in with the anemones, as well as my zoas and my mushrooms and every other coral that I had, and everybody was absolutely fine. Kevin did perfect in there for months. Now, Kevin is my saltwater pufferfish. I think we've had him for almost 2 years now, maybe more, maybe less. He's a stars and stripes pufferfish, and these guys change color all the time. He's more of a green and white and yellow right now, but when we got him, he was black. I love Kevin. Kevin doesn't like me though. Kevin is an absolute disgusting pig. Let me explain why. When I had him in with the anemones, I'm sorry for calling him names, but if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and acts like a duck, it's probably a disgusting pig. So Kevin was in his tank and everything was fine. Moved him over to another holding tank because I wanted to set this up as a beautiful coral aquarium. We're gonna do tons of, it was going to be something else. move them over with all those coral, and for some reason, that switch of tanks, which can trigger it, sometimes it'll work in one tank, sometimes it'll not work in another tank. My Fahaka works great with the Oscars, but some people can't get the Fahaka to work with anything. I mean, if I move the Fahaka to another aquarium, maybe he won't get along with anybody, and then maybe if I try to put him back with the Oscars, he'll just kill everyone. We don't know. It's just sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. Kevin ate everything. Kevin ate every anemone, and he knows it. He ate every anemone. He ate every polyp that there was. He ate everything in that aquarium besides his homies. Now, me being without any coral, I thought, I don't really want to start all over again because I grew those anemones. I got them to split. I went from 3 or whatever it was to over 30 anemones, and I was so proud of that. You know, me and my filthy water made that happen. Then I thought, you know, what if I take saltwater fish and put them in like a freshwater environment, you know, with a rock background and rock bottom. Let me show you what I did. This rock background used to be in with my Tropheus. We also have some rocks to match. There is crushed coral at the bottom here, just to help buffer the pH and to serve as something for the fish to pick through if they're bored, as well as, of course, serve as a place for even more bacteria to thrive. I cannot have a cleanup crew in here. No crabs, no snails, no nothing, because Gutsy McGuts will eat them all, won't you, Kevin? Kevin's actually a big boy, too. There's also a placemat under here, which looks like a bunch of small rocks, and this as well, but this is all one piece. These are not part of it, and then there's a little bit of crushed coral on top of it. Just giving it a really natural look. This is all done by Aqua Decor, by the way. So I then decided I'm going to just do a fish-only system with Kevin and a few of his friends. Once all of the coral were gone, I noticed the clowns started fighting, so I decided we're only going to keep one of those guys. I decided I'd keep that black one, because even having two, there was too much warring. A war broke out with my yellow tank, so I just kept one of them, kept the fox face because he gets along with everybody. The sailfin is Tamara's favorite. I do have a blue tang in there as well, or a Nassau or a hippo, whatever you want to call it. We do have some, the trigger fishes in there as well. And then, of course, we have the Banggai cardinals, which are technically showing signs of breeding, which has been absolutely fascinating to watch them display and whatnot. Will it actually happen? I don't know. Probably not in this aquarium. I don't know if I'm missing any other fish that are in here, but this tank, as is, kind of set up like a freshwater tank. Not only do the lights match, and it kind of like blends in with all the other aquariums. It's just so unique because it's got saltwater fish running as a saltwater aquarium. Very active. Everybody gets along perfectly. You can see nobody's damaged. Nobody's got torn fins. Nobody's fighting. Everybody's healthy, nice and plump. Especially Kevin. Kevin's my homie. When I sat here at the desk, I could see Kevin right from here, and he just watches me all day like the creep he is. I see him right over my computer screen, and he can see me. And we just gaze into each other's eyes. I wish I had his life, he wishes he had mine. This aquarium, I call it Kevin and Associates. And every time I come over here and spend time with them, Kevin's definitely been a big eye-opener for me, because as a freshwater enthusiast, like, that's my lifeblood. I've always looked at like saltwater fish as being colorful but no personality and boring. And boy, was I wrong when it came to Kevin. Kevin is no different than any freshwater fish I have, arguably more personality than all of them. The only thing that I don't do is trust him. He will bite me. Anyways, that was my saltwater aquarium update that many of you guys were really asking about and wanting to know about, but I was kind of just doing my own thing with it for months now, just enjoying it and seeing if I liked it. And I don't know how you guys will feel of it being a saltwater aquarium with a freshwater look. But you don't see these types of things that often, and I kind of wanted to see what it would look like. Kevin and Associates are doing absolutely fantastic, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Have you ever thought about transitioning from fresh to salt and were scared because of all the equipment and didn't know what to do? And has this video made you feel a little bit better of, well, shoot, I probably have a... I mean, you can do this with a canister filter or hang on the back. I'd probably stay away from internal filters. But in a fish-only system with hardy fish, this can be done, and it could be getting your toes wet into the saltwater world. Who knows? Years from now, you could have a full-blown coral aquarium. I don't know if I will, but I'll always have Kevin. Oh, and associates.